Britain is leaving the European Union, but we are not leaving Europe. A global Britain that stands tall in the world will be a Britain that remains a good friend and ally to all our European partners. Thank you. Now, first, Laura, first hand up.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You've said many times that you believe deeply that voters must be able to trust their politicians. Let me read you something, if I may. A Conservative government will not raise VAT, income tax or national insurance. Now, as you well know, that appeared in the Conservative manifesto in 2015, the basis upon which voters elected a Tory government. Will you admit that you have broken that promise to the public? And if you don't you risk looking like other politicians who try to wriggle out of uncomfortable truths? Those politicians that you yourself have criticised for doing just that.
We've been very clear, the government was very clear, that when the tax lock legislation was passed, that it related to the Class 1 national insurance contributions. Now, of course, it's Class 1 NICs that cover 85% of workers. The legislation was clear that it was honouring our manifesto commitment in our 2015 manifesto, and no amendments or concerns were raised at the time. But let me, if I may, just talk about the budget yesterday, because we did make some difficult decisions in the budget yesterday. But those decisions allowed us to fund an ambitious new approach to technical education, to open more than 100 new free schools and meet the growing demand for social care, as well as investing in the long-term productivity of the economy. And it did so while maintaining our commitment to balance the country's books. Now, the decision on national insurance was taken in the context of a rapidly changing labour market, in which the number of people in self-employment, often doing the same work as people who are employed more traditionally, is rising rapidly. And indeed, I understand that the Institute for Fiscal Studies earlier today has said that it actually backed the rises to Class 4 national insurance contributions paid by the self-employed, because they say that the current system distorts decisions, creates complexity and is unfair. And I think when you come to reforming tax, and yes, raising revenue to pay for skills, schools and social care, you need to ask yourself a number of things. First of all, you need to ask, is the money going on the right things? Well, I've just listed hugely important investments that we're making, such as technical education. You need to ask whether it's making the tax system more sustainable. And what we see is, yes, it is, because the shift towards self-employment is eroding the tax base. It's making it harder to afford the public services on which ordinary working families depend. And this goes some way towards fixing that. I think you need to ask, is it fair? And I think it is fair to close the gap in contributions between two people doing the same work and using the same public services to make the same contribution to wider society. And then I think the final question you ask is it progressive? And the changes that will be put through on NICs to Class 2 and Class 4, taken together, under those, the lowest paid self-employed workers will be better off, and half the revenues raised will be paid by the best off, by the wealthiest. And of course, the change to national insurance will require legislation of its own. It won't be part of the finance bill. That's always what happens with national insurance changes. And those elements of the package will be brought forward in the autumn, as I say, making lower paid self-employed workers better off. And what we will do this summer is publish a paper which will explain the full effects of the changes to Class 2 and Class 4, along with some changes we plan to make on rights and protections for self-employed workers, including on issues like pension rights and parental rights and maternity pay. And if you just remember back, Laura, one of the first things I did as Prime Minister was to commission Matthew Taylor to review the rights and protections that were available to self-employed workers and whether they should be enhanced. And people will be able to look at the government paper when we produce it, showing all our changes, and take a judgment in the round. And of course, the Chancellor will be speaking, as will his ministers, to MPs, business people and others to listen to the concerns. But as I've said, this is a change that leaves lower paid self-employed workers better off. It's accompanied by more rights and protections for self-employed workers, and it reforms the system of national insurance to make it simpler, to make it fairer and to make it more progressive. And next, Kate, Kate, yes.
Thank you. Kate McCann from The Telegraph. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has called on you to channel Margaret Thatcher and make clear to our EU partners that a Brexit divorce would be unreasonable. Do you agree with the Foreign Secretary? Would such a bill be unreasonable?
Well, first of all, let me be very clear. There's only ever one Margaret Thatcher. But if it comes to the issue of of the comments about paying money into the European Union, Boris is clear and I'm clear that when people voted on the 23rd of June for us to leave the European Union, they voted for us in the future not paying huge sums of money into the European Union every year. And of course, when we leave the EU, that will be the case. Faisal.
Prime Minister, just back on the budget, you said that you felt that this was a matter for the legislation, but the manifesto was very... Sorry, the manifesto was very clear, Prime Minister. 5 times it said that national insurance wouldn't be raised. Ordinary working people will have just read the manifesto. What do you say to those people who will feel shortchanged by this?
Well, as I said in my earlier answer to Laura, when the tax law legislation was put through, which dealt with the various issues of taxation that were addressed in the manifesto, it was very clear that it related to Class 1 national insurance, and that covers 85% of workers. So 85% of the people who are of workers, as I say, were covered by that Class 1 national insurance element of the tax lock. And at the time, it was made very clear that it was that legislation that was delivering on our manifesto commitment, and there were no amendments and no concerns raised at the time. Final one? Yes.
Nancy Hungerford from CNBC. Prime Minister, are you confident that you have U.S. President Donald Trump's full support in getting the best deal for the UK in Brexit negotiations?
Well, first of all, when I was with President Trump, I was very pleased we were able to discuss the future relationship, of course, on trading terms for the United Kingdom with the United States of America. He's keen that we enhance that trading relationship, as am I. Of course, there are limits to what we can sign up to until we've actually left the European Union, but we are, as with other countries, able to start talking about the sort of arrangements that we can have in trading terms. And the point I made to President Trump, as I've made to my European colleagues, is that it is in the interests of the United Kingdom for us to have a strong European Union, the strong remaining 27 in the European Union, and I think that's important for us. I think that's important for the United States as well. I'll take one more question. Yes? Yeah.
So much. Caroline Cohn on Bloomberg TV. The Danish foreign minister said that a post-Brexit trade deal could take up to 15 years. Is he wrong? And what makes you think it would actually be possible to do it within 2 years, given that we know Michel Barnier, for example, is very against negotiating a parallel trade deal at the same time as a Brexit deal?
Well, first of all, obviously, the treaty sets out that in looking when a country is leaving the European Union, that the process, which is Article 50 sets out, is for the withdrawal, but also setting the framework for the future relationship, actually should take the 2 years. And that is the timetable that we're working to, and that's the timetable that the European Union is working to. Yes, I am optimistic that we can achieve a good and a comprehensive free trade deal with the European Union. Why am I optimistic about that? Because it's not just about what's in the UK's interests, it's also about what is in the interests of the European Union. And I think what we see in the discussions and comments that I hear, that increasingly as we look, obviously we haven't started the negotiations, we will start those when we trigger Article 50, and we will do that by the end of this month. But when we come to look at those negotiations, I think what people will see is that the relationship between the UK and the EU of the future matters not just to the UK. This isn't just about what's good for the UK. It's about what's good for the European Union as well. And I believe that that good free trade arrangement between the UK and the European Union is in the interests of both sides of that negotiation. Thank you very much.
We will make America great again.